You can pre-order Modern Horizons 3 using my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Saturday. That means it's time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. We are in the very early stages of Modern Horizons 3 Limited. You probably had your pre-releases this weekend. I played in the early access event earlier this week. Should already be 2 draft videos up on the channel, and there'll be another one that comes out tomorrow. So I have already drafted the format 3 times going into this first episode of Nitsa Notes about it. I, of course, also did a set review where I covered every single card in the set, gave my initial impressions. So if you want a deeper dive than what I'm going to do in this video, check that out. But this video is kind of a Cliff's Notes of what I did in the set review, in that I'm going to talk about the best commons and uncommons in each color. This is often the most important thing in, like, if you're only going to do one thing in a limited format, knowing the best commons and uncommons in each color is probably where you should start. Combine maybe, especially in a synergy heavy set like this one, with what each color pair is doing. But yeah, this is a good place to start if you want sort of an intro to the format that isn't a deep dive into every single card. So yeah, we'll go ahead and take a look at it. I'm trying to think, because I have drafted the format 3 times. Some of these cards might have moved around a little bit from where I had them in the set review, but I don't think by much. I mean, 3 drafts, it's pretty hard to, know everything, be sure about anything after only 3 drafts. It's a pretty small sample size. But if there are things that are a little different, I guess that's why. Anyway, let's dive right in. Start with talking about white, where I think the 3rd best common is Inspired Inventor. So this card, and this is something that I don't think I did a great job of elaborating about in the set review or discussing, and that is that this is one of those kinds of commons that's in a color that is like a glue of sorts that holds together a bunch of different archetypes, because the main things that white is interested in this format are energy, it's got you covered, going wide, it's got you covered, and modifications, as you covered there too. None of the modes you play Inspired Inventor on feel amazing, but it fits into every single white deck in the format, and it just is, a nice card. And I think it is white's 3rd best common. It's not exactly the kind of common you want to first pick, I don't think, but it is pretty good. I think white's 2nd best common is Airy Auxiliary. Yeah, I mean, this just is a crazy good rate. 4 mana for a 3/3 flyer and support 2. You are paying 4 mana for 5/5 worth of stats, and support 2, provided you had 2 other creatures to put the counters on. The other 2/2 power has haste almost, because oftentimes it means you can attack when you couldn't before, right? You don't always have 2 bodies, but if you only have 1, it's still a pretty good rate, and you frequently do. Like, if you're in white, there's a good chance you went 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, put 2 counters on the things I already have, attack with both of them. And you can do that with a bunch of commons, and it's a pretty powerful start to a game, and that's just what makes Airy Auxiliary good, and I do think it's first pickable. And I think the best white common, and it's close, I think Airy Auxiliary and Thraben Charm, you could probably switch them, and I don't think I'd debate you, but I think Thraben Charm is the best. The reasons being, it ends up lining up as premium level removal pretty often. I mean, you usually have at least 1 creature in play, and if you have 2, you're getting a pretty good deal. And then it has these other 2 modes that, it would still be pretty good without them, but having these other options that do come up in the format on occasion is certainly nice. And it's just a really efficient card. It lets you interact at instant speed. It's just really, really good. It's a good removal spell that is flexible. It does have, and that's the thing, Airy Auxiliary's floor isn't as bad as Thraben Charms, right? Because you still have a 4 mana 3/3 flyer. But for either of them, you're not really going to see the floor that often. They're just going to be good. All right, and then white's best uncommon, I think, is Ajani Fells the Godsire. I did get an opportunity to play with all of these cards, actually, already, in the all 4 of these white cards I'm talking about in the early access event. And Ajani Fells the Godsire really impressed me. Played against it, too, unfortunately. But, yeah, so usually you pay 5, and it kills something on Chapter 1, and that wouldn't be a good deal. But the way sagas work, anytime you have, when we're evaluating sagas, I think a shorthand we can go with is, does this give me more than 1 card worth of value, even though I have to wait for it? And if the answer is yes, it's usually good. And that's exactly what Ajani Fells the Godsire does. In fact, in some cases, it might even feel like 3 cards worth of value. That 2nd chapter gives you a body, and then you can put a vigilance counter on anything, which, by the way, is a modification, so that matters. And you often have something better than the token it makes you to put the vigilance counter on, in which case it feels really good, and it often enables attack you didn't have before. And then chapter 3 is just like, by the way, here's double strike. I'm going to turn pretty much any creature you attack with into a threat. And white has so many flyers in it too that sending over a flying double striker is like, pretty commonplace. So Johnny Fells the Godsire is great. It's definitely a 2-for-1. It delivers the amount of value you'd expect for 5 mana, and you get more than one card too. I mean, another way to look at sagas frequently depends on the order of the abilities sometimes. But as long as you have a chapter 1 and a chapter 2 or a chapter 2 that impact the board, that feels pretty good. But another way to look at them is think about how good this card would be if you got all of it at once, right? If you paid 5 mana for a 2/1 that gave something else a vigilance counter or itself, and exiled a creature, and gave something double strike until end of turn. That's a far better card than what a Johnny Fells the Godsire is, but it's not so much better, right? Like, the way sagas work, it just ends up being really powerful, and a Johnny Fells the Godsire is definitely the best white uncommon. Let's move to blue now, where I think the third best blue common is Tune the Narrative. This is one I could see going up. I liked this in the set review. It reminds me of Birthday Escape and the last sort of Modern Horizons set had with the Lord of the Rings set, in that it replaces itself and then gives you value on top of it. That value is not worth a whole card, but like 2 energy in a lot of blue decks goes a long way towards letting you activate something you couldn't before. So it gives you more than a card worth of value. Certainly, I think a card and a half isn't crazy. When you're paying 1 mana for that, that's pretty good. It also works in the blue-black deck, which likes it when you draw cards. So Tune the Narrative is just like a really nice common to have in basically all the blue decks. I think the second best blue common is Utter Insignificance. This is going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on, because it seems like every time it looks like blue has a pretty good removal spell unlimited, it doesn't. And that could end up happening here. I haven't seen anything that makes me feel really strongly that it's great or really sure that it's bad so far. But, these sorts of removal spells that frogify a creature or whatever, turn it into something smaller with no abilities, usually aren't very good. And that's because, as I always like to hammer this point home, because no matter what, I see people play cards like this. And in this case, we have a better version, but cards that are removal that give your opponent something or let them have something left behind are really, really bad and limited, almost no matter how efficient they are. Look at Bovine Intervention, a card in Thunder Junction that I saw way too many people play. It's just an awful card because you don't actually trade 1-for-1. You basically 2-for-1 yourself in exchange for removal, and that's rarely worth it. And that's usually what a card like Utter Insignificance does too. Maybe a 1/1 isn't worth a full card worth of value, sure, but it can attack and it can block and it can be sacrificed. It can be used as a resource for all sorts of things. It can be bounced back to their hand. The list goes on and on. So it's not a 1-for-1 trade. However, this has a couple things going on that I do think make it better. One of them is Flash, so it can kind of work as a combat trick. You can, play it on your opponent's thing that has blocked or is attacking you and kill it in combat, sure. The other thing is that it can permanently get rid of the thing if you have the mana lying around. So it's definitely not like an amazing removal spell, but I do think it's good enough to be blue's second best common. And at number 1, I've got Serum Visionary. 3 mana 2/2 that draws you a card is a good card already. Like, we play that card in virtually every limited format. And this is better because obviously it's Serum Vision stapled to a 2/2, right? So you also get to Scry 2 afterwards. And Scry 2 is not a small thing, no matter what stage of the game it is. If you play this on 3, it can help you hit your 4th land drop or whatever, and then if you get it late, you can get rid of those lands that are on top after you draw your card and really improve your chances. There are a few ways to blink creatures in this format as well that makes Serum Visionary even better. It draws you a card, which blue-black decks care about. It's just a really efficient 2-for-1 that has some format-specific upside that is pretty impressive. And I think blue's best uncommon is Depth Defiler. So, you knew I was going to love this card, right? It's a Mana War, an Eldrazi one, a 5 mana 3/5 that enters and bounces a creature to its owner's hand. Except it's way more than that, because it has 2 modes you can choose from, both of which are good. Draw 2, discard 1 on a 5 mana 3/5 would play that card too. If that was the only option, I would play that card. But you have two options. And in this day and age, sometimes you don't want to bounce something. For example, because the only creatures your opponent has in play have enter the battlefield abilities. We've all been there at this point in Magic, where it seems like so many creatures have them. And so when that's the case, you just draw to a discard one, which is, again, a pretty good enter the battlefield ability. It's better, I mean, I probably don't need to tell you this, but it's better than just draw a card. Even though you net the same number of cards, the card selection is better. You can load the graveyard. Like, I would play 5 mana, 3/5. When this enters the battlefield, draw a card 100%. Well, maybe not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time in most limited formats, other than the fastest ones around. So we have all this stuff going on that makes this card really good. And we haven't even talked about the kicker yet, which is kicker that you can spend colorless and get both modes. So 6 mana to get both of these modes, it's crazy. Like, it's more than a 2-for-1 in most cases. It's better than that in most cases. So yeah, I mean, Depth Defiler is really, really good. It can impact the board if you need it to. It can dig you deeper in your deck if you need it to. And if it's late enough and you have an Eldrazi spawn lying around, you can also just get both. So Depth Defiler is really, really good. All right, let's take a look now at the best black commons. I think the third best one is Breathe Your Last. There are a decent number of creatures in this format that need to be answered or you're in trouble. So I think this, like OTJ, is a format where removal is back to being pretty good. This one has some upside. I mean, it is a little bit of a bummer that you don't gain any life when you kill something with Devoid or you know, that's straight up colorless. But it's murder as a baseline, and, you know, even just tacking 1 life onto murder feels pretty good. Like, I talk about it a lot in set reviews and about limited, but removal spells that also gain you life are like one of the best things at stabilizing you. Just like, you know, 5 mana creature that gains you some life when it enters is also pretty good at stabilizing you. It has the same kind of effect where you are either adding or subtracting from the board and also doing this other thing that makes it harder for you to die. Even if it's just 1 life, that can help, you know? And sometimes you'll get 2, and very rarely you'll get more than that. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good removal spell. It's not an insane one by any stretch, especially, you know, the double black is a problem, as it always is. You know, limited mana bases, even in a set like this one, are bad. And so you just can't really count on things working out all the time. But it's still black's third best common, I think. I think black's second best common is Wither and Bloom. Once we're talking about 2 mana removal spells that can kill a wide swath of things, you're pretty much on board with that, and that's what this is. You know, you can always use these sort of as tricks too in a pinch. That's sort of an emergency only situation because things can go so wrong, but it can also just outright kill things. And then it randomly gives you a counter out of your graveyard, which is pretty good in a format where modifications matter, and black is one of the colors that cares about them. So, you know, it gives you pretty good value as a removal spell, and then just tacks on this little bit of additional value, kind of like Breathe Your Last does, except it's better in most ways because it's easier to cast, it's more efficient. It can't kill as many things, but it can trade up a lot more easily than Breathe Your Last can too. Like, you can pay 2 mana to kill things that cost 4 and 5 mana all the time with Wither and Bloom, and that's a big part of what makes it better. And I think black's best common is Refurbished Familiar. Maybe I'm a bit biased here, you know, it is a rat, but this card is really good. I think it would probably be in the top 3 commons for black if it didn't have affinity for artifacts. Like, 4 mana, 2/1 flyer, sure, that's a bad stat line. But it's going to make your opponent discard a card or draw you a card no matter what. And that's what really seals the deal here. If it was just like a usual, like, Ravenous Rats ETB where your opponent just discarded, wouldn't be as good because your opponent doesn't always have cards, right? Especially in the late game. But if you get this late and you play it, which it might only cost 1 mana when that's the case, it's going to draw you a card, and if it's a real card, it's probably a card you can play. So, yeah, I mean, it's good without affinity, and if you're in black-red especially, it's going to be cheaper. You're going to spend 2 or 3 mana on it with regularity, and in the late game, it's going to cost 1 and draw you a card. It's got a nice disruptive into the battlefield ability. It itself is an artifact, which really matters in the black-red deck, so it's just, you know, it's a great common. I liked it in the set review, and from what I've seen of it in actual gameplay, I've been impressed with it too. And I think black's best uncommon is just Fell the Profane. It's not exciting. It's not an exciting card, you know, to look at. It's a 4 mana removal spell, and if that's all it was, it wouldn't be that good. You know, it's basically worse than the murder variant we looked at, because sure, it can kill planeswalkers too, but there aren't that many of them, although there are more of them in this format than we usually see. But there aren't that many of them overall, and Fell the Profane costs 1 more mana. But you just can't understate or overstate how good these double-faced cards are. Like, the ones that have really situational effects are really good. Like, they're all cards that you take in, like, the first, third or so of picks in most packs, like the first 5 picks in most packs. So the ones that have effects that are like real, like Fell the Profane, which is, albeit inefficient, it is a removal spell that can deal with pretty much anything, and it can do it at instant speed. And it's also a land when you need it to be, which is, usually if you draw this early, you're going to consider playing it as a land pretty seriously. And if you draw it late, you're probably killing something. And either of those modes is pretty good. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting card because just the Fell the Profane side, probably a C+ at best, but the modality of these is just so important. And it makes a card like this a higher pick than all the commons we've talked about, even though they all have higher baselines, but they don't have the flexibility where you can run fewer lands in your deck. You're going to get mana screwed less, and you're going to get mana flooded less because of Fell the Profane. Like, these cards are all really good. Like, there's not a single one of these modal double-faced cards in the set that isn't really good. And this is one of the best ones because it's a card you would play anyway, but it can also be a land. So in some ways it's not exciting because it doesn't have this big splashy effect or anything. It's kind of like a responsible person's card because a lot of the value you get out of it is not getting mana screwed and not getting mana flooded as often, as opposed to what it actually does, but it's really, really strong. All right, let's move to red now, where I think the third best common is Skoa Embermage. If you had the fortune or misfortune of stopping by my early access stream, the very first draft I did in the format, I think I had one of these like third pick, and I was like, okay, maybe we'll get more of them, and then we got them like 3 picks in a row, and I just built a 4 Skoa Embermage deck because, that's what the universe wanted me to do. It didn't go super well in the end. That is the first draft video up on the channel if you want to check it out. The deck wasn't horrible, but we went 0-3. There was some cool stuff we did with Skoa. But anyway, all that aside, how it performed for me and all that, doesn't matter that much. But if you want to see a multiple Skoa deck that takes advantage of its grandeur, it's here on the channel. But even without the grandeur, if we put that aside, it's a 6-mana 4/4 that enters and does 4 to anything. That's really strong. It's a 2-for-1 all the time, and it gives you reach that you don't have against your opponent who's at 4 or less life. They're just dead out of nowhere. It's just a powerful card. And it's actually funny because I think the draft video that goes up tomorrow, I ended up having 1 Skoa, and I ended up killing people with it more than I did in the 4 Skoa deck. But anyway, it's a good card. I don't know, based on one draft that was kind of wacky in the very first draft I did in the format, I don't know for sure whether I'd say stay away from playing a bunch of Skoas and trying to fire blast people with the grandeur ability. But, it is a 6-drop. Playing 1 is probably correct more often than playing 4 is what I think I would say. But it's a good card either way. It's a little expensive, but it's a 2-for-1, and it has flexibility with stuff that lets you rebuy ETBs and stuff like that. I think red's second best common is Feigned Flames. It's just super efficient, 2 mana for 4 damage to a creature or a planeswalker, and that thing gets exiled. That's just great. It's going to deal with a lot of things that are way more expensive than 2 mana. Shuts off death triggers, shuts off recursion. That's just an amazing card. And it would be, I think, in a lot of sets, red's just best common, but it's not because there's one better red removal spell, and that's Galvanic Discharge, which at its worst is a lightning bolt that can only hit creatures, but it has all this other upside. For one thing, if you really needed the energy for one reason, usually you're going to want to use this as a removal spell, but it's not impossible that you're in a spot where you say, if I had 3 more energy, I can win the game, right? Well, it has a mode where you just pay 1 and gain 3 energy. so that's a thing. It also has a mode where you pay 1 and you kill something with 2 toughness and hold on to 1 energy. And then it has a mode where if you have more energy lying around, it's 1 mana to do like 6. So all of those make it way more flexible than, one red mana instant, deal 3 to a creature or planeswalker would be an amazing common in any set, and this is even better. So it's hard to say. There's just not a common that's better than this in red, and maybe not in this set. I mean, the one thing it doesn't have going for it, I mean, it has extreme efficiency is what it has going for it. It's not a card that can always generate a 2-for-1, though, and in limited, those are often important, but it's so efficient that it's definitely one of the best commons in the set, if not the best common. And then I think the best red uncommon is Ral in the Implicit Maze. It comes down, usually kills at least one thing your opponent has. Sometimes it's far more devastating than that with Chapter 1. Then you have Chapter 2, where it's pretty easy for you to net cards because you can discard a land or whatever and draw 2 effectively. And then Chapter 3 gives you a real body, a 2/2 with super prowess. It gets counters instead of just +1/+1 until end of turn. So you end up getting, like I talked about with the Johnny Fells the Godsire, you can very easily get a 2-for-1 out of this card, just out of Chapter 1 and 3. But there's a chance you get a 3-for-1 because of Chapter 2, and there's also a chance it's even more efficient than that because of Chapter 1. There are times where it doesn't kill anything of your opponents. There are some people playing big old beefy Eldrazi and 2 damage to them. Doesn't make a difference, and it does feel, I've had it happen in the format, and it does feel kind of sad when that's what you end up doing with it. But as long as you're killing at least one thing with Chapter 1, you're kind of golden from there. And even if you don't, you might be able to get enough value out of Chapters 2 and 3. And like I said, most of the time, Chapter 1's going to kill something that your opponent has. So, Ral in the Implicit Maze is a great uncommon. I give it a bomb grade in the set review, and I think it deserves one. I think maybe a Johnny Fells the Godsire did too. I give it a B+, I think, in the set review, rather than the A- I gave Ral in the Implicit Maze. But yeah, there are 2 really strong uncommon sagas in this set. And the red one and the white one are just insane. It's a little weird. The green one's pretty good, but then I don't really like the other 2. Formats tend to be more fun to me when every deck has sagas or access to them. I just love sagas as far as limited goes. But anyway, so that's red. Let's move now to green, where I think the third best common is Evolution Witness. It's not quite Eternal Witness, but it's close. And, in some ways it can be better. It's not in terms of raw value, because Eternal Witness is just 3 mana, 2/1, do the thing this does when it gets a counter, which is crazy. And, that's what made it such a good card in 5th Dawn Limited, as well as, 60-card formats and Commander. But it does have some things going for it. One of them is that it can get significantly bigger than an Eternal Witness, thanks to Adapt. Another is you can get the trigger more than once if you have other ways to put counters on it, which in green isn't far-fetched. The big downside with the card is that up front it is super inefficient. Doesn't feel very good when your opponent attacks you with, a bunch of cheap creatures that it just can't even block very effectively. So that's bad. But the good news is if you draw it late enough, you can just sink all the mana into it, make it big enough to be relevant, and get a card back. But there are times where it's pretty awkward, but it's a good card overall, and I think green's third best common. I think green's second best common is Nightshade Dryad. This is probably one of the better mana dorks we've seen in Limited before, at least at 2 mana. I mean, it's not Noble Hierarch or Birds of Paradise or something like that. It's not a 1 mana dork, but for a 2 mana one, it's pretty nuts because it's capable of producing every kind of mana you'd ever want in the format, including colorless, importantly. So that's great. But then it also has Death Touch. And the big weakness, even with cards like Birds of Paradise and Lana War Elves that are better just because they're cheaper, they're a lot worse late than Nightshade Dryad is, because you draw them and you're like, great, this is basically like drawing a land, except it can block at least, I guess. It's going to chump something. But this can trade for anything. So if you draw it late, its body matters. Your opponent has to find a way to get around it, or they have to give something up to get through it. And that's all there is to it. So it's really good. It's easily a first pickable kind of card in green. But there's one green card that's even better. And that's Horrific Assault, which for 1 green mana lets your creature deal damage equal to its power to a creature you don't control. So it's Rabid Bite for half the mana, and then it has Eldrazi upside that gains you 3 life. And in green, you're pretty likely to have one. Remember, you don't have to fight with an Eldrazi, which is good, because that means if you have a random spawn hanging out, you still gain 3. It doesn't matter what you fight with, you gain 3 if you have an Eldrazi. So you gain 3 a lot, and I was talking earlier about removal that gains you life and how good it is. Well, this can do it for 1 mana, and I've seen it cast already, probably 4 or 5 times. And I feel like my opponent gained 3, like 4 out of those 5 times, and I think that's kind of how it's going to go. And then I think green's best uncommon is Propagator Drone. So, you know, you get a 2-mana 2/2 up front, but it has really good abilities. First, creature tokens you control have evolve. Something to keep in mind, and it's kind of fun that they put it in the reminder text here. At the end you can say, they see this creature enter. So, if you have a couple of 0/1 Eldrazi spawns in play when you play this, you just put 2 counters on them as an enter the battlefield ability, more or less, right? And that happens. Like, I've seen it happen. I'm going to see it happen even more. So, if you get it early and you can get some tokens going, and it doesn't count just Eldrazi's tokens either, by the way, so sometimes that comes up. You get the evolve going and you curve out and your tokens get huge really quickly. So that is really good. And it would be a great uncommon if things ended there. But then it has this mana sink ability where it can spit out Eldrazi spawn. So even if you get it late, you can sink mana into making 0/1s, which at worst can chump block your opponent's stuff. And at best, you keep them around, and every creature you draw buffs all of them. So it's really good on 2. It's really good in the late game because of the activated ability. It can really allow you to run away with games in a hurry. And it's just a 2-drop. Like, it's the kind of 2-drop that if it comes down and you can't deal with it, there's a good chance you lose. And that is, I think, what makes it green's best uncommon. So those are my picks for the best commons and uncommons in each color in Modern Horizons 3. Got a lot more limited content coming your way for this format, including a draft video tomorrow. And I think it launches on Arena on Tuesday. So hopefully Tuesday I'll be able to get a draft video up after it launches, and we'll have draft videos and more episodes of Needs and Notes covering this brand new format, which so far I think is a lot of fun. But yeah, be covering it more. So don't forget to subscribe if you want to see that. And thanks for watching.